The scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, which are closely associated with the names of Descartes, Kepler, Galilei, Leibniz, and Newton, can be summed up in two contentions. Firstly, the new science aimed to ground knowledge in empiricism and observation. Secondly, it was keen to expand the field of experience that could be explored by human perception with the help of technical devices such as the telescope or the microscope. But the revolutionaries could not embark on these new journeys straight away. First, they had to circumvent the theological dogma formulated by Augustine, one of the church fathers, according to which scientific curiosity was a reprehensible urge. Because it was inadmissible to peek into God's secret chambers, they had to find a way to derive scientific interest and thirst for knowledge from the authority of the Bible itself. It was precisely what the statesman and theoretician of science, Francis Bacon, set out to do in his seminal book of the Advancement of Learning, published in 1605. In which he laid down the principles of a new science founded on empiricism and experimentation, reminding his readers that according to the book of Revelation, quote, "The globe which seemeth us a dark and shady body is in the view of God as crystal." And he concluded that the exploration of man and of all things was under a special obligation to adopt his perspective. The gaze of man ought to become the gaze of God, or in the words of Bacon, quote, "It is the perfect law of inquiry of truth that nothing be in the globe of matter which should not be likewise in the globe of crystal or form. That is, that there be not anything in being and action which should not be drawn and collected into contemplation and doctrine." This was in 1605, and since that time the crystallization of the world for the gaze of man has been made decisive progress. Today, the arsenal of technological devices, which in Bacon's time, besides navigational instruments for seafaring, comprised the first, rather weak telescopes and microscopes. It includes huge telescopes looking into galaxies billions of years away from the Earth, and gigantic particle accelerators that open up new pathways into the micro worlds of elementary particles. But the data produced by these devices and systems has long propelled us beyond the optical threshold of God's transparent world, since elementary particles cannot be made visible, but only calculated. The fact that the famous Higgs boson, which according to the currently valid standard model of particle physics generates the masses of quarks and leptons, has been nicknamed the God particle. It has caused alarm among bishops and other successors of Augustine. I would argue that this moniker is actually useful. For one, the function of the Higgs quantum field, which gives elementary particles their mass, can be compared to God's biblical act of creation to the extent that he also formed the earth from chaos. Secondly, it means that we no longer have to explain the creation of the world by comparing it to the work of a watchmaker who, after winding up the cosmos, leaned back to observe with both delight and horror the history of the world unwinding itself without being able to intervene. Accordingly, God, as a field quantum, is now busy everywhere preventing disorderly and massless elementary particles from hurtling through energy fields they created themselves. We can free ourselves from the conception that God exists in a privileged observer modus, gazing from a celestial lookout into the transparent events of the macro and microcosm. In fact, The word transparency itself, which has been tremendously successful of late, was invented at the end of the Middle Ages to solve the paradoxical conception that God, angels, and ghosts are both visible and immaterial at the same time. It was a scholastic doctor of the church, Albertus Magnus, who, in his commentary on Aristotle's essay on the soul, invented the word transparens, a term hitherto absent from Latin dictionaries. Transparency defines first of all the characteristic of a medium which is itself invisible but can in turn make light visible. The theologians who excitedly proceeded to let Albertus' new world flow from their quills essentially wanted to describe the immaterial and yet bodily nature of the eternal souls. Thomas Aquinas, the main theological authority of the medieval age, added that the main characteristic shared by the heavenly bodies, in other words, humans, stars, angels, and God, were transparency and illumination. This enabled him to explain what the physical and the theological consistence of heavenly bodies and the nature of the immaterial materia prima that constitutes the substance of the superlunary world and of the spirits inhabiting it. These creatures are as immaterial as elementary particles, and yet they are substances. In his Summa Theologica, Thomas eventually tackles the question whether the souls of the saved can be seen by the eyes of the unsaved, who happen to be wondering about the cosmos. In his own words, whether the clarity, it's a quote, whether the clarity of the beatified bodies will be visible to the non-glorified eye. Thomas knew that the souls of the blessed could indeed be seen with the eyes of the non-blessed, because they are as transparent as crystal, and in this crystal vessel rests the soul as though it were gold. But the scientific world, represented by the great Bacon, no longer wants to rely on the theological authority of the equally great Thomas. In the historic moment we are witnessing today, it has seized on the little word transparency as eagerly as the medieval church fathers did, hoping to put its paradox healing virtues to good use. Because the deeper our gaze appears to penetrate into the secrets of matter, things, and power, the greater our desire to know more about them and to keep glimpsing behind the diaphragm of the next mystery. The fly on a pane of glass is Friedrich Nietzsche's image for the foolish attempts to penetrate things, to penetrate through a thing through which we can see. In terms of the contemporary world and its flourishing discourses on transparency, this means that we are confusing data with reality and media with the world. Our fly brains led us to believe that when we learn something about invisible processes or look into remote things, thanks to data or figures, we are actually in them, similarly to God particles. But this foolishness deserves to be regarded with indulgence, since the flies of all errors and many a scientist of our day merely want to understand our changed situation. These are our situations. Each technological invention that armed the eye with a new weapon seems to bring us one step closer to the redeeming objective, which is so finally be able to listen to reality itself and make things, galaxies, elements, proteins, populations, and brains reveal their secrets effortlessly. Effortlessly, because Bacon wanted to physically wrest nature's secrets from her. Quote, "For like a man's disposition is never well known till he be crossed, so the passages and variations of nature cannot appear so fully in the liberty of nature as in the trials and vexations of art." Quote end. It is therefore useful to see that these contemporaneous paradoxes perpetuate past flies' misfortunes. I would like to discuss the paradoxes of transparency, the fly's astonishment at finding out that it isn't a God particle, by looking at two topical examples. These concern two technologies that drive the crystallization of the world, two ideal conceptions of pan-vision that these techniques seem to turn into realities. Firstly, there is the urge to observe ourselves from the sky in a kind of real-time process and to capture evil with electronic eyes. Secondly, there is a desire to capture what we think and feel. Breaking with Bacon's tortuous approach, some neuroscientists no longer want to listen to anything coming out of the mouth of their experimental subjects in the aporia of words, and instead prefer to read the écriture automatique, the automatic writing of their brains. The most systematic approximations of God's pan-vision is pursued by the US-American company Digital Globe with its orbital satellites scanning the entire world from high above. Satellite technology was initially an investment by states, armies, and secret services for military purposes. But private companies were quick to harness this new technology to offer business and government agency an all-around service, information, security, defense, disaster management, and mapping. The penultimate steps that will lead to the orbitalization of self-observation has already been taken. The final step will be the continual real-time scrutiny of ourselves. This epochal shift, which aimed to make satellite technology accessible not only to commerce but also to entertainment and convenience applications, was made possible by the satellite QuickBird 2, which was put into orbit on October 2001 to look at our planet from an altitude of 450 kilometers. QuickBird 2, which has meanwhile decayed, circled the Earth at a rate of 3 to 7 days per rotation, depending on the latitude. Every image it took captured a 16.5 kilometers square surface of the Earth onto 128 gigabytes of memory. In September 2007, Digital Globe launched a new satellite named Worldview 1, which is currently still circling the globe in 1.2 days at an altitude of around 500 kilometers, each day photographing 750,000 square kilometers of the surface of the Earth. With Worldview 4 scheduled to take up its position as a technological eye of God in 2016, the fleet of Worldview satellites will cover 1 billion square kilometers of the Earth. In the eyes of a satellite launched into the sky by private companies, the Earth is first and foremost a commercial space that must be filled as quickly as possible with sellable data. Looking down from the sky helps to sell houses and real estate, locate oil and gas reserves, control property. Yet Digital Globe promotes its services with a metaphysical promise for both security as well for insecurity. You find it prepares for both evolving global security, evolving global insecurity. Whatever happens, they are prepared. How such a transparent world can be strategically exploited is illustrated by the US-American Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative. They use Digital Globe's imagery to secure US interests in the Indo-Pacific, which are euphemistically subsumed under the term of global security or global insecurity. The Indo-Pacific region is host to some of the world's most important shipping lanes. This is a quote. Facilitates huge volumes of regional trade and boasts abundant natural resources. Competing territorial claims in incidents between neighboring countries and increasing militarization, however, raise the possibility that an isolated event at sea could become a geopolitical catastrophe. This is all occurring against a backdrop of relative opaqueness. The claim that making the world visible to military eyes serves the general interest of humanity is grounded in the stubborn ideology of transparency. In contemporary literature, this trope has become a subject of derision and alarm alike. In his essayistic short story, The Time Scanner, the Norwegian writer Jostein Gaarder projects current technological utopias and ideologies 100 years into the future, imagining the installation of a time scanner at CERN in Geneva, where a proton accelerator is currently still looking for the God particle. The device imagined by Gaarder allows all users, as humans are now called, to choose any time in the history of the universe from the Big Bang 16 billion years ago to the moment that has just elapsed, thanks to a history search function and to observe it as a filmed present time. At last it is possible to witness the sinking of the Titanic or to eavesdrop on Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir having coffee in 1952, or even to look at ourselves scanning time. But while all this is still ahead of us, the technological premise for every word spoken on the planet to be recorded, for every malicious statement against global security to be intercepted, is already within reach. Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, recently wrote that in 2029 you will be able to buy 11 petabytes for $100 in a single hard drive. This, he calculated, would allow an immortal user to record 600 years of 24 hours a day DVD quality videos. The fictive world of a huge internet company and the US writer David Eggers' novel The Circle derives directly from the present time. The company that gives the book its title is a kind of combination of Google, Facebook, YouTube, and other social media services. Led by the so-called three wise men, it provides users with a single account, identity, password, and payment system. When the book's main protagonist, Marie Holland, joins the company as an employee, she initially feels like she is in heaven. As she admires the dazzling headquarters of the company, readers are immediately reminded of the transparent glass and steel construction cultivated by modernity. The entrance hall is the size of a cathedral, walls are of glass, and even the floor on which Mai walks piously is so transparent that it makes her head spin for a brief moment. The mantra of the circle, secrets are lies, sharing is caring, privacy is theft, suggests that transparency brings peace of mind. Thomas Aquinas could well be its CEO. The circle also stands for monitoring the world, as virtually every corner of the globe is scanned by the company's own cameras to add to the sum of knowledge about the world. One particular aspect in Egger's story that strikes a chord with contemporary readers concerns the processes of adaptation by which the employees and users of the circle are turned into willing participants without so much as a hint of violence. This painless terror takes the shape of employees who are consumed with their own eagerness. Power no longer operates through violence and sanctions, as in the similar novels of Samyatin, Orwell, or Huxley, but by suggesting blissful participation. After a rapid rise through the ranks, Mai thus decides to go transparent herself by strapping a camera on her body that makes her observable online day and night. Her example is followed by a congresswoman who wants to promote the quasi-religious idea of transparency in society. By doing so, she sets off a chain reaction to the effect that 5 weeks later, more than 16,000 politicians are fitted with the camera. Those who refuse to pay the game expose themselves to suspicion. Surely they have something to hide. Shortly afterwards, critics denouncing the circle's monopoly or voicing reservations about its breach of privacy are accused as criminals with links to Al-Qaeda or arrested as presumed users of child pornography. For Mai, it all seems plausible as the old symmetry of good and bad is restored visibly and invisibly. All corners of the circle are pervaded by the earliest of transparency ideologies. All will end well, as in the celestial spheres of transparent spirits. This, then, is how the contemporary ideology of transparency reunites 3 separate conceptions, namely the concept of the blessed and the redeemed transparent body, as discussed by the scholastic philosophers, the motto of the science founded by Bacon, with the aim to make the world and all things crystal clear and transparent, and finally, the memorable belief that if human thought and intention could be extracted from the obscurity of the skull, all lies and the evil rooted in them could be eradicated from the world. This goal, it turns out, is pursued to this day by the neurophysiologists who claim to observe thought itself with the help of a functional magnetic resonance imaging technology. In an interview with the Berliner Zeitung in 2007, the neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes stated that, I quote, "In a few years' time, we will be able to read from brain scans whether someone has, for instance, attended an Al-Qaeda training camp or studied instructions on how to build a bomb." The technology used to do this, functional magnetic resonance imaging, has been steadily developing for 2 decades and purports to localize cognitive, emotional, and even creative processes in the cortex through vague patterns of neuronal stimulation. The new word coined to describe this research, which attracts a lot of media attention, is brain reading. This is but one example for this ideology that wants to eradicate evil once and for all by looking into the crystal ball of the brain. The US company No Lie MRI, for instance, offers MRI-based polygraph tests. On its website, neat images help to confuse readers regarding the criteria according to which truth and lies can be read from brain scans. You can see blue is truth and red is lie. The menu of its website lures government clients with the following service. For developing countries where government corruption is a serious problem, accurate lie detection would be of tremendous benefit for rooting out corrupt individuals. This would enable trusts to be placed in the governmental and economic system of these countries, encourage greater foreign capital investments to be made, and thus spur modernization of these countries. The brain behind the no-lie service is the neuroscientist Daniel Langleben of the University of Pennsylvania. The American public broadcaster NPR hailed him as a pioneer in the lie detection field, adding that Langleben might go down in history as a man who revolutionized lie detection. The history of which he wants to write an important chapter started 13 years ago, and for the time being, Langleben and many of his colleagues look like they are fooling the world with empty promises, adding yet another meaning to the term lie detection. In a polemical essay of what he calls neuromythology, the neuroscientist Felix Hasler suggested the bosses of the MRI companies should be hooked up to their own devices and asked if they believed in their methods. The folly of lie detection feeds on the possibilities of the fMRI technology to produce images using so-called BOLD for blood oxygen level dependent signals, that is measurements of the relative levels of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. This formidable technology makes it possible to produce high-resolution scans of given body parts. Fundamentally, however, the no-lie assessment based on brain scans made during interrogations rely on the vague idea that lying requires more neural efforts and hence more oxygen than telling the truth. But on the deceitful imagery produced by the lie scans, other neuronal activities that require oxygen can hardly be distinguished from, say, the stimuli linked to the answers. The ideology of transparency helps to sustain the delusion of scientists, but also judges, business people, and public officers who are desperate for technological tools. Their needs have been driving the connivance of politics and science, a complicity even Kant bemoaned in his day. Kant also noted that only the philosophical faculty is not driven by the desire to rule. Quote, the philosophical faculty can never lay aside its arms in the face of the danger that threatens the truth entrusted to its protection, because the higher faculties will never give up their desire to rule. All these concepts of transparency, which believe they can read matter, the universe, the brain, with the help of complex machines, appear obsessed with the West's ancient messianic longing to restore a mediumless, proto-paradisical world of innocence. This is a centuries-old conception that the complete illumination and ultimate transparency of the world can ban all power, and none more so than the power of false speech. It is the impossible dream to make the density materiality mediality and technicity, and hence the evil of the world disappear. It is a dream of the fly on the window pane. Thank you so much.
So thanks a lot for this really wonderful presentation, Manfred Schneider. I'm also very grateful that you mentioned Zamyatin, because he's always forgotten in these contexts. Mostly people mention Huxley and other Western writers. So Zamyatin, for those of you who don't know him, he was a Russian writer who wrote this novel We, and this is really the blueprint for later novels like 1984 and A Brave New World. Do you have questions? Please. Now it's the time to ask Manfred Schneider what he has been talking about. I have prepared some questions, so maybe I start, and while I'm asking, you can think about possible questions and things you would like to know. So my question to you would actually be, is the notion of transparency, is this notion a visual notion? Or, because I always have a problem with kind of reducing this world to, let's say, visualization or visual definition. I remember that in 2001, it's already like a long time ago, there was a book published by Lev Manovich. It's called The Language of New Media. And in this book, he described a language of new media which was exclusively visual. And I think it's really a problem, because today we are faced with much more than surveillance cameras, right? I mean, this transparency, it goes, I think, way beyond things we can see, yeah, or things that are visual. Can you say something about that? So about transparency, and whether it's for you it's a visual term or a visual metaphor, or please.
What I wanted to point out is that the career of this world, the career in the last 25 years, is something very astonishing, and I think it would be impossible without this visual aspect of its denotation, because for what it means in the current speech to know more about power, governments, agency, and so on, for more information, there are a lot of other words prepared in our language. But the career of this word is interesting, and my answer to this is that transparency has always been connected to this idea of a new visual world, or of a world becoming a better world by a higher grade of transparency. And this is, well, you may say it's coming from far that the church fathers may have developed this term, but I'm sure that this messianic and utopian aspects of its denotation have to do with this history that had been renewed and updated in the centuries after.
I have to grab the microphone again. Another thing that kept me thinking was you are criticizing the fact that we, or these companies you have been describing, they take the data for reality, and they take, or we take, the media for the world. I perfectly get your point, but still I think that we are faced with a situation where data and bodies and media and the world, they are kind of much more, how to say, they are very strongly connected to each other. It's almost as if there's a mixing of these things. And so I would suggest that possibly you can make connections through data onto bodies, or you can make connections to bodies through data, and also to the world through media. Because I think, yeah, I don't know, I have difficulties to finding the right words. I perfectly see your point that you're criticizing this sort of visualization of data. This is always completely, how could I say this? It's not erratic, yeah, possibly. So how are data being visualized? But still, I think we are today in a situation where data is not merely data.
Absolutely, you are right. But what I have been working out indeed is that all these enterprises to make part of the world visible suggest that we definitely know everything, that we have got and have entered in God's view of the world. And indeed, there is astonishing development of the visuality and the possibility of making the world open the world for our eyes. But on the other hand, you have the simple problem: the nearer your look goes, the closer your look goes to details in the real world, the more you forget about the rest of it. That is a simple epistemological thing. What we are speaking about, of course, about data and to which extent data are leading us and leading society and so on. It's right, but I think it's crucial to make this difference between data and the world, and between what we see on the screen and what is possible. You know, all methods of medical analysis of the body proceed in knowledge of a special realm of bodily reality, but at the same time it forgets a lot of what exists. And what is happening now that so many medical treatments are developed and are coming in fashion has to do with this fact that the medical progress it's great and it's really something we need, but on the other hand, it lets fade away parts of the reality of the body and the person and of what illness can be and so on.
Okay, that's great. So thanks again, Professor Schneider. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.